Well, hey, everybody, thanks again for joining us for this TWE Brain Trust. I'm very excited to welcome my friend Kyle Woolgar. Kyle Woolgar comes to us from Procom, and he has a lot to say and a lot of knowledge when it comes to hiring and finding success with contingent workforce and temporary expertise and capacity. So welcome, Kyle. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Tim, for having me, and thanks to Teamwork Excellence. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Well, I'm really happy to have you here. And I mean, this is part of what we are all about, and that is helping leaders and teams, build the capacity they need and really take control of their future and what they're trying to accomplish. And I think right now, as we've talked about this in the weeks leading up to this, we're in an unprecedented time here. We are seeing a perfect storm of situations coming together, albeit with the pandemic and now the return to work, and people reevaluating themselves. When we look at businesses have so much to do, they've got to recover from this. Generally, they're dealing with unfinished initiatives and programs that might be behind. And at the same time, we're seeing that we've got these waves of people leaving, and we're expected to see this wave, just increase. And if you haven't seen it yet, you're going to see it now. We're hearing about the turnover tsunami and the great reshuffle, and now the hashtag, big shift that we're seeing all over LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, how is this affecting your work right now? Maybe you can give us a little bit of your perspective as you see all of this sort of coming down the pipe.
Yeah, it's a pretty exceptional set of circumstances that have led us to where we are now. It's a bit of a perfect storm, and I think that the attrition tsunami is a great way to kind of envision this reorganization across organizations, if you will. So in our business, we're constantly placing mostly contractors as well as full-time employees. And right now, we're already starting to see a demand for talent and skill sets that's exceeding pre-COVID levels. So if you didn't have a plan or strategy for this yet, it's definitely time to start really thinking about this, strategizing and planning, because whether we like it or not, it's the realities of the talent marketplace right now, and it is going to affect all of us. So I think now is a great time to really start talking about this.
Yeah, I mean, leaders need to see this as a viable option. They need to see it as accessible, and that's one of the things we're going to be trying to, ease people into today if they haven't used them before. And if they are using them, we want to really see them maximize the value that they can get out of these temporary teammates. So we'll talk a little bit about that. One of the things that I was curious about when I was looking back over my notes was that, pre-pandemic, McKinsey had identified 5 main types of actions that they feel that companies really needed to take in order to build a holistic workforce strategy. And that was, some of the things we've heard before: retraining, redeployment, hiring, and retention, being able to contract effectively, and being able to release effectively when needed. And I would say, that 4th point, being able to contract, or as I prefer to call it, call for reinforcements, now is really important, because we're going to see this, people being out in the job market. And if we don't have the ability to stabilize our businesses quickly, then we're not going to be a viable landing place for the talent that is out there. So how would you advise somebody that was going to, use temporary talent to stabilize the workplace? I'm going to ask you the question directly. Yeah, there we'll go.
So, yeah. In a nutshell, you just one sentence maybe for that one.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we certainly are seeing some really interesting data coming out, as you were alluding to. Some of the studies are saying between 50 to 75% of people are talking about changing jobs or quitting their job post-pandemic here as we're starting to come out of that. So what does that mean for organizations? How do we maintain a stable ship through this huge transition that we can expect to go through? And I think one of the ways we can do that is stabilizing, reinforcing our culture as best we can right now to try to mitigate some of that attrition that we may or may not expect to experience with our organization, as well as providing a stable platform for those new resources to land on as best we can as well. And
Yeah,
contractors can assist in that as in that kind of stabilization and help you through the storm. You know, they can help right your mast, if you will, as you're riding out some rough waters, as hired guns or reinforcements that can, you know, come in and help contribute to that stability.
yeah, and they can really help in a couple of different ways. I mean, on our side, we would actually work directly on that stability and in the culture and the teams. But more generally, just having that supplementary kind of workforce and the time gives you room to breathe. It gives you room to sort of find your feet and, you know, continue to work and stabilize things, have the capacity you need to really establish that before you can find a new normal, right? And you know, when we look at what's happening now, I think you're exactly right. I remember reading in the Washington Post, they said when the school year began, 865,000 women left the workforce, while only 216,000 men did. I bring that up not because it's sort of you know, looking to dig too far into it, but think about if you're working on, you know, some of the situations that we're working on, like just diversity and inclusion, or really, you know, finding balance in the workplace when it comes to, you know, what does our workforce landscape look like?
Mm-hmm.
This is throwing a wrench in all of that in a way, and so it's becoming a challenge. It's creating chaos in areas where we were really working hard to create stability. So yeah, when we go back to there's all this reason, why do you think that some people don't immediately consider this an option?
I think unfamiliarity. Before I ever got into this world of contracting, I had no idea how big it was, that it was really a viable option, that there's really smart, really talented people out there doing this. I had no clue. So it's estimated that about half of the workforce in the United States is contingent. That number is a bit different in Canada. Pre-COVID, it was about 32%, then estimated to be about 35% by 2025. I think we'll, you know, see 35+% sooner than that. So it's maybe just unfamiliarity. If they are familiar with it, maybe there's some misunderstandings, and then also fear of the unknown potentially. How do we do this, and how do we do it correctly? So I think there's a few variables in that equation.
So let's dig into that. Let's talk about how we can do it correctly. And how would you define, or how could we define, maybe for everybody out there, what we mean by doing it well or doing it correctly? What should a leader experience if they're having a good experience with hiring contingent workforce?
Yeah, so the hiring process itself is often different than hiring a full-time employee, although it should probably mirror hiring a full-time employee a lot more closely. I think that's an area of improvement for a lot of organizations, because you want to ensure that you're not just getting the requisite skills and experience you need to come in and deliver some piece of work or whatever you need help with, but they are also still there as part of your organization's brand, influencing your organization's culture and those things as well. So one of the challenges we see often is a division or silo between procurement, who often kind of owns contract workers, and HR. And those silos really need to be broken down in that process to ensure that both sides' goals are really being considered and well met. And there's a lot of overlap in common goals there, but if you're only looking through one set of lenses, you might not be considering the others. So I think that's one. But then from an experience standpoint, when you are that manager and you're bringing in this talent to execute some work for you, often the expectation is that a contractor is going to come in and really either chew through a backlog of work or start providing deliverables very, very quickly. They have a set of skills and experience, kind of the tried, tested, true, been there, done that type of resource that can come in and start adding value like immediately. So that's typically what I think most managers would expect from a contract resource, and that's often what's delivered.
Yeah. So I mean, you have these two sort of situations. You may hire somebody that can act, in a highly independent way, has a separate job to deliver, may not impact the team's overall goals, and they could be more or less left to their own devices and just report into the leader. But then you have these others that join the team in a temporary way, either to add expertise or capacity. And then the question comes, especially when we're talking about crossing over with HR, do you integrate them into the culture of the team? And what's the cost if you don't? And this is a question that, we're also talking about, is that one of the questions that we had been hearing was, well, do I invite them to my team meetings? Or we're having a barbecue. Do I invite the temporary contract person there? When I've been on teams, and I've been on both sides of that, where I've been sort of a long-term contingent resource, or I've been a coach or a consultant that comes into it. I've been an employee too, but that, on those sides, the line that I draw in my head is, do the team members rely on me? Do I need to integrate with their work? Are they looking for me to make small deliverables that they need to link into? And interleaving is the word that we often use, right? That you're sort of meshing together these pages of a book. And if that's the case, then I want to know how they're feeling, and I want to know what the culture is and how do I integrate effectively. And I would say that's a skill set that many contingent workers or temporary contractors have to have, is they have to be able to mesh with that culture. So in my opinion, if they're not fully independent, and you expect them to know your team, I'm saying, yeah, invite us to the hot dog roast, because it's a good chance for us to know, who you are. And I think that's as we're talking about setting them up for success, you can sure avoid a lot of problems if you understand what the full-time employees are thinking about. Mm-hmm. So there's sort of this funny balance where you want to treat them like that, they're part of the culture if they're not part of the workforce in a way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it also creates a fine line for an organization to try to walk, because it's at the same time you want to fold them into your organization and have them understand your team and company, and you them. You also need to ensure that you're delineating between your employees and your contractors. And that's where a lot of risk is associated with misclassification, co-employment, these types of concerns. So it becomes a fine line to walk. It really does. And there's not a simple silver bullet solution. I think one of the areas that some organizations are getting right is that, any meeting or event that involves that contractor's work in any significant way, absolutely, it's critical to involve them in and allow them to hear your employees' opinions and perspectives, and vice versa. But if it's a strictly social event, a team building event, I think that there's significant risk in having those resources attend that. As much as there's value, I would think you would gain value of having them, really well integrated into your team. There's too much risk when it comes to that side. So it's a bit of a funny line to walk, I think, because it is important. They are not your core employees.
Right.
And it is really important to delineate and make sure you differentiate between the two. So yeah, that's kind of the way I see it break down.
That's a really valuable distinction, because I guess where I'm coming from is that there shouldn't be barriers for them to meet and know those people that they're working with, or at least anticipate what they're doing. But as you say, you don't want to you don't want to fuzz the line between internal and external resources. You can actually create a lot of resentment among your existing staff if that carries on for too long, and they see a contracted position being advantageous or something, you can create a whole different set of problems for yourself. And as we go into what the benefits are of that delineation and what you're getting from them, I mean, I think that's part of the business case for hiring a contractor, right? Is that you have to be able to say, I want to get the good stuff. I want to avoid additional costs that I would have to, sink into a long-term employee. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but if you're needing, somebody for the sprint, not the marathon, then you need to be able to take advantage of those abilities. So why don't we talk about a few of those? When a person is considering hiring an outside resource, or they need to make an argument for it, how do you break down what the business case should look like? What are they gaining, and what costs are they avoiding?
Sure. Yeah. Maybe I'll back up slightly because I think they tie in well together. Is that there often is a misperception between internal employees and what contractors cost, and the organization and what contractors cost. So I often see full-time employees kind of get a sense or have a feeling in their gut that, this contractor comes in and they're so high, these high paid consultants, that kind of thing. Maybe they hear about their hourly rate, and they try to equate that to their salary or something. And it's really important to keep in mind that there's so much more to the cost of an employee than their base salary. There's the employer, burdens, statutory burdens, but also all the other, health benefits and paid vacation, training, et cetera, et cetera. That list goes on. So the true cost of a full-time employee is often much, much bigger than the average full-time employee has the visibility into. So we see contractors considered as high cost at times, but from an organization who's hiring contractors well, from their perspective, it's a cost saving. So I think that ties into your kind of next point about what is some of the advantages. One is when contractors are used well and appropriately, there's an opportunity for cost savings. And then second to that is certainly flexibility. There's no commitment of any kind beyond the work when they wrap up the project, whatever it is. So it allows you to kind of dial up and dial down as needed, whether that's because an attrition tsunami is coming, whether that's challenges in foreseeing the demand workload from your client base, maybe, whatever it might be. So it gives you a lot of flexibility to help you bridge gaps, that kind of thing. It also gives you access to a different pool of talent. So most individuals are happy as either one or the other, a full-time employee or a contractor. They don't that often blend together. In the Venn diagram, there's very little overlap. So it allows you to fish in another pond for skills. And a lot of those folks are often also quite highly specialized. So they're maybe narrow and deep in their skill set, so they can really come in and deliver great value. So that's another component as well. So certainly lots of upside.
For sure. I mean, when we were talking earlier, we were generating a list of all the reasons why we think people would want to hire contractors. And I know some of this was something that I don't always consider, right? Some of it I think is bread and butter for us, but that you'd want, here's just a few of them. So you'd want to test out a new team design before committing to, really building a team strategy around that. Would these roles fit together? That could be a temporary assignment. We need to replace workers like right now. I think that's the obvious one. We need to bridge through a growth phase. Sometimes, and you and I, again, there's an optimal team size for a certain type of work. And then to make it to the next step, we have to, essentially do a long-term commitment. There could be a big gap in between that. And, an extra temporary or part-time worker can help us, have that 0.5 FTE or a temporary assignment so that we can make it to the next level, maybe scale up our business enough to justify another full-time hire. As you said, hiring expertise, big one, short-term bump in capacity, obviously that one. The other one that came up when we were talking about this with clients was it's an opportunity to shake up your team. to really disrupt the team and get an influx of new ideas, to get an influx of perhaps a different method of performing, and perhaps even a different rate of performance or frequency. And that can sometimes open people's eyes. Unbiased, bold opinions. That's sort of the hallmark of a lot of contractors and consultants. And then perhaps an unfettered independent approach. I think we've already talked about that. The last one, I think, is more a contentious piece, but somebody that can do the uncomfortable work, especially if that work needs to be done. And then it's best if that person departs. And we hate talking about the dirty work, but that can be part of it. It's something that has to be done. It's a little bit messy, and then that person can be removed in good faith without having to hang around and bear the burden of being the person that made some very tough
certainly
moves.
There's horses for courses. There's all kinds of different contractors out there, and they might have the exact kind of same skill set and experience, but their methodology or their approach may or may not be appropriate for your engagement. Could be a really great contractor, but they're that kind of dirty work hired gun that you maybe referred to. Maybe they're a project manager, and they are going to get that project done on time, on budget, guaranteed. They don't care how much blood is on the ground afterwards. They're out the door. But
hey, Kyle.
If you need that, some organizations at times need that, then they're out there, right? So it's about selecting the right type of resource. If it's a political environment, you have conflicting stakeholders. Then you need someone with some nuance and the ability that, not everyone's a nail for them to hammer. Got a larger toolkit that they can utilize. So I think that there's a lot to be said for that there are times where it's appropriate to get folks. And
I'm glad we covered it. I mean, because the thing is that that's a reality, and we can sugarcoat it all we want, but that is part of the contractor experience or the or the function. It's not the only function, but it definitely is out there. So we might as well nod to it. We got a couple of questions coming in, and I'll get to those in just a minute. I think as we're going through the business case, and you had said that we're talking about how a contractor can land and they can do their work and they can get out. So before we get to this, because I think it's a great question, I would say there's some steps that we should be taking generally to set our contractors up for success. I'd like to hear what you think, but on my side, I think it's very important. Obviously, the scoping and those kind of pieces, but one thing I don't think gets done enough is that we very, very clearly articulate not just the project aim and whatnot, but how the client interprets that thing and how the contractor interprets that thing. And to assume that conversation has gone on, I think, is one of the major stumble points. Are they defining everything the same way? Do they see success the same way? It may mean different things for the two people, but does it get us in the same position? And, doing that at the beginning and doing it throughout the engagement, I think, is so very important. It's where, if it's the first thing we do, if we ever run into hiccups or stalls or anything like that. So what's your thought on that? How do you handle that?
I would say, that's really where the rubber starts hitting the road, right? So how do we ensure that we're setting up these individuals? Once we made the decision that we feel it's the appropriate time to utilize a contractor, how do we make sure that we're getting the right type of resource in the door and we're setting them up for success? And so it's probably my project management background a little bit, but scoping, planning, documenting upfront. It's very similar challenges we see at times with hiring even full-time employees. Is there really an understanding of what skills you really need? What do you actually really need them to deliver? And then what are your expectations of them? Have you mapped out some deliverables for them, 30, 60, 90 days, whatever your kind of time frame is, so that expectations are level set? And this is upfront work. How do you select a contractor, bring them in, and then tell them this stuff? This is the type of stuff that you should be, really thinking about And if you don't have this exact expertise to know on this piece of work what the time frame would be, ballpark it best you can, and then spitball that with the contractors when you're interviewing them and see what their perspectives are. But you need to put in that upfront work. Then after that, you're not managing them, because that's an important distinction between employees and contractors, is you're not managing them, but checking in regularly is fine. Asking for deliverables, documentation, status updates be sent in. So you still need to really communicate. Communication is still the key with success to a contractor, like it is a full-time employee. There's no difference. So clarity, level set expectations, and regular check-ins are what's really important.
Mm-hmm. I mean, skip that step, don't maintain that, and I think we see some pretty typical outcomes. We see that people can fail to capture value that's sitting there, the expertise, and utilizing them, and instead, let them kind of be confused or not able to, like, we always say, point us at a problem and let us solve it, right? Like, give us something to work on, and then we'll take our client along for the ride, absolutely, and train while we're doing it. But we need to have, this is ours to solve, and we're going to go at it. Let's get to one of the questions, because I think it's an interesting one. This is Simeon, I believe, and he's joining us from LinkedIn, and he asked the question: as a member of the contingent workforce, how do I educate the client on the potential benefits and explain the differences between employees, independent contractors, and professional services constructors? So how does he do it from his side? How can he really help the client understand the difference?
Yeah, it is a challenge. I can see what Simeon's saying there. It's part of what I face on a regular basis, is helping to continually educate the industry about what the differences are and how you can use them well. It's not common practice. I think that talking about your previous experience is one really good way. So here's examples of where I came in and delivered this type of work and how that differentiated from the employees on that team, for example. Can be one way you can differentiate yourself and how you can contribute differently than an FTE. I think most companies know that, the flexibility is there. It's not a long-term commitment, that kind of thing. So there's not usually that much point in talking about that. But I think the deliverables and highlighting your expertise, how you can come in and do something differently than the team they have, is the way to do that.
Mm-hmm. Often when we go into an engagement, we'll actually take a look at, well, what internal options do you have to do this, or where would we transition to eventually? And in that conversation, we can usually help them understand, is it truly best for us to come in as an external? Because we're able to draw the gap between, well, if you do this internally, you're going to take time to ramp up. You're going to need to train these people to do it. You're going to be guessing at certain things, or at least not having experience doing that. And then you're going to have to do something with those people afterwards. So that would be your sort of strategy if you're to do it internally. We layer ourselves in on top and we say, okay, as an alternate strategy, we would come in, we'd be able to get started a little sooner. We would be really concentrated on getting this one piece done, and then we would lose. Or lose. Then we would win, but then you would lose us. We would go away. And taking a look at those two realities side by side, or at least talking through them, can, in my experience, can cement in the mind of the client, why they are making a good choice, why they're getting the most of what they want and the least of what they don't, and what are the benefits behind it. There's always benefits to both approaches, but having a very clear understanding of why it makes sense, I think, is important. And on a larger corporate scale, I think when you're doing your hiring strategy, or your staffing strategy, or your business development, or maturity curve, you can kind of identify where there's points where we're going to need extra help. And the reason why we're talking this today is because it seems like every company on the planet right now is approaching one of these where, we don't talk about this a lot, but it seems like there's going to be a lot of need for reinforcement. And it's going to be curious what happens when we've got a lot of need and not a lot of demand, or sorry, a lot of demand and not a lot of supply. So, but I hope that gave Simeon some ideas.
Could I jump in there with something else, Tim, if I may? I think that a lot of organizations don't necessarily do a great job of what is often called resource planning and looking at total talent management strategies. And as part of that, a contingent workforce management strategy that is long-term and it's overarching, and it goes along with your 3 or 5 year business plan, and it considers how and when we're going to need people. Those kinds of forecastings and plannings are really going to line you up for success. It's not easy. It's a lot of work, but it will make the journey much, much smoother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, being able to anticipate it and react ahead of time and get people trained up. I mean, this, at the end of the day, this is a skill that people develop. They develop comfort with the notion of bringing in somebody outside. There's a lot of things that hold people to one side of that curve or the other. We see teams that use contractors far too much, and then we see teams that don't use them when they could. So maybe let's go down that path. What would be some of the drivers in your mind of a team or a leader that is, perhaps fearful of using contractors or doesn't see it as accessible?
Yeah, I guess I would be curious. Maybe it's the misunderstanding of cost, or the perceived challenge of folding them into the team and how to structure that, and will that impact their culture? Maybe, those types of things. I think that it does take a bit of courage and bravery. If you haven't done it before, it's new, uncharted territory for you. So you have to have a bit of a leap of faith that you're capable of doing it, that it can work. And I would recommend to reach out to people, talk to, hopefully you've got some mentors in your network. You can reach out to me. I'd be happy to, have a chat with you, or other peers who've utilized contractors, ask them about their experiences. So lean on your network a bit, I think, and try to quell your fears.
I think the trust in oneself too, to be able to say, like, look, I have the option to change this if it's not working out. In fact, with a contractor, I might have greater option, because if somebody doesn't fit in the first few weeks, especially if I'm hiring them from an agency or something, I can go in and say, you know what, this isn't working. And so do we have another option? But at the end of the day, trust yourself that you can make a call if it's not what you want. You can also talk to that contractor and likely get a decent resolution that way, especially if you're doing the check-ins. But ultimately, you have the control. In fact, it's highly flexible that you can make a shift if you need to. So trust yourself that you're able to make that call, and you're able to really keep in your mind what the ultimate vision here is.
Yeah, that's one of the real beauties of it is it's very low commitment. Most contractors are engaged most of the time on an hourly basis, at time and materials, so they're very infrequently materials, and their termination clauses, and 2 weeks notice is more than enough. Allow the organization to end a contract for convenience immediately. And that's not at all uncommon. So yeah, you don't have to worry about it. It's not like hiring an employee. It's very different. You get to get out if you need to.
And from the contractor's perspective, mine basically, that lack of security. And with us, we build into every contract we do a 2 week out, no matter what. It's like, if you're not happy, we're not going to hold you, even if you sign a longer term agreement. But that demands, not, and we're prepared to give our assurances that we maintain, that reputational integrity, because it's our business. We approach things from an entrepreneurial standpoint, and so we have to have discipline around quality and making sure that we are, over delivering, and that we are, always delighting the person. And it goes beyond the contractual commitment, because the contractual commitment, yes, it's there, but it's a shared risk for the contractor and the client. We're there to, bring our best every day, and we bear the responsibility if we don't. So we have, there's not a lot of buffer for the contracted resource if things start to go off. So it's in their best interests to not slack in any way, shape, or form. We've got to be right on top of it. It's one of the most exciting things. I mean, this is why I love that work, because it is, I get a chance to meet so many different people and see so many different methods and philosophies and approaches, and really, build my own book of knowledge as I'm doing that. I don't think, for myself, I love that risk, and that the fact that it's like a very pure relationship with nothing really in between. So for me, that's a very important part of the experience. Just being willing to say, hey, my name's on this. I'm not letting it out of my sight. Right.
Yeah, that's the perfect high performance contractors kind of mantra. You've got skin in the game. You're committed. You're engaged. You're you're well aligned with the same outcomes that your client is seeking, and it's your reputation. And if you want to get more work in the future, you're going to come in and deliver value. And a good goal of a lot of contractors I've talked to is they want to work themselves out of a job. That's how they know they've performed well in a role. They've set up their client for success to carry on really well without them into the future.
Yeah. I don't want the problem that I've been brought in to help with to persist. I want to solve that problem. I want to leave them happy. I want to leave them able to sustain it themselves. And I want to be called in on the next problem, the next evolution of problems. And when I come back to that client, I want to be coming back to an evolved, scaled up, more mature, organization. And I think that's, being able to see that happen, and then come in when it matters and when you can make the most amount of difference. We talk about languishing with COVID. For some, if you're internal to an organization, there are great people as employees. So this is by no means a slight on the employee, but you're thinking long term. And every once in a while, you run into a situation where you are between roles, or where you're ready for the next step. And those are important times for an employee, and it's a really important part of everybody's career that they need to consider and they need to have control over. With the risk of being a consultant, you gain the ability to kind of come in at when you're needed most and leave soon afterwards. I think there's a different set of problems that comes with that professionally, but there's also a lot of reward. So the notion that people could potentially miss out on the opportunity, there's a lot of reasons why they could give it a try if they haven't done it before, and a lot of resources they can go to make that transition possible. And you talked about it too, the ease at which you can roll somebody in, not just the justification of it, but how easy it can be is a big part of the experience. So being able to sort of, I need somebody, I can go and ask somebody, and I can bring somebody in a very short amount of time, is very powerful, especially when hiring managers might be used to bringing an employee on in 3, 6, 9 months sometimes, these long waits for capacity. So, you've talked a lot about that, about making it easy.
Yeah, certainly, if you've ever tried to get approval to add an FTE headcount to your team, what that upfront process can look like in a lot of organizations, and bureaucracy and red tape you have to go through for budgets and approvals, et cetera, et cetera. And then, running a competition and HR involved and multi-stage interviews and full-time employees often having to provide notice to their current employer. And, like you say, it could be 3 to 9 months, depending. Whereas contractors, you can get them in the door much, much quicker. Usually it comes out of some kind of budget, a project budget or something. And you can have someone in the chair, in a week, maybe even less. Usually it's a couple of weeks type of thing. And they're there and they're on the ground delivering.
So we could be accused at this point of being really high on, and both of us have a vested interest in people getting used to using contract resources. So let's play the other side of the coin for a minute.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the other condition. And the other condition is when people are using contractors far too much or in the wrong capacity, and how to kind of sniff that out, what to be aware of, what to look for, that may be you. I've got a few ideas in this area, but I'd like to hear yours first. Let's talk about the inappropriate use of contractors where it doesn't make sense and what we can do to guard ourselves against that.
Yeah, certainly. And some of the, pitfalls you can get caught in if you're not careful. So I think that we were just kind of talking about the CapEx versus OpEx expenditures. And if you're bringing in contractors to just do operations and sustainment and work that's core to your business, that's not the time. Unless it's like for an urgent medical leave, you need to use a gap stop there. That makes sense. But if you have someone on a 12-month contract and you're just renewing them year after year, that's not a contract resource, and there's risks associated with that very potentially. Whether
not
that's
just the cost, but the
as reclassification issues potentially, that kind of thing with CRA. So you have to be really cautious of that. So that's one factor. Another one would be if you get a resource in and they're, I think you touched on this in one of our conversations, Tim, if they're maybe hoarding information or ensuring their future in that organization, not allowing others to have visibility or insight into what they're doing and how they're doing it so that someone else can take over the work. That's a challenge.
That's like a hostage situation when you're holding the client hostage with work, gatekeeping.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, exactly. And so that kind of goes back to, from the beginning, did we really set up clear expectations of the deliverables? Did it include knowledge transfer? Did it include documentation? Were we having regular check-ins? Those kinds of things are going to help you avoid those.
When are they protecting their role more than they're protecting the work, right? And their duty to the client, right?
Yeah. That's exactly it. It's an unfortunate scenario that is seen very infrequently, I think, but it exists, similar to employees who hoard information to ensure they're the only ones who can perform their job. No one's going to get my job. Well, you'll also never get promoted, because you're the only one who can do your job. So if you want to sit there and you're stuck in that forever, I guess that, is kind of a bit of an old school mentality, but it's still out there for some folks.
It is out there, but it's very infrequent. It's not something that we see all the time. And when you can spot it, follow your nose, ask some questions, and chances are you can uncover it fairly quickly. Since we're talking about nightmare scenarios, I'll say one that I've ran into more than once in my career. I'll say that much. And that is where we have a team that has surrounded themselves with contractors. And they use the contractors as intermediaries. Now, this isn't something you're going to see all the time. But in this instance, the issue isn't capacity and the issue isn't work or even expertise, but I've seen contract resources being put in place so that team members don't actually have to interact. And we have a malfunctioning team where there's animosity buildup or there's a lack of communication or something's happened. The team isn't functioning, and so they let the contractors be the go-betweens. And as I say, I've seen this more than once, I'll say that much. But in that instance, when you're using them to essentially communicate between team members, I think it's time to consider, why is this team, what's at the root of this problem? Because we're not actually fixing, the root cause. And that's just one thing to look out for when you could be using them improperly, I would say.
It's a great tip, Tim, and certainly that would be indicative of some kind of much more challenging cultural issue to resolve.
There is one fear that came up for us, and I would encourage everybody, as we're sort of moving towards the last quarter here, we've got probably about 10 minutes left. Make sure that you enter your questions. If we're not covering something that you are curious about, go ahead and throw those into the chat on whatever platform you're on, and we've got something that's amalgamating them, so we'll definitely see them. But in the meantime, I'll go back to some of the questions that came up in my conversations with clients as we were getting ready for this. One was a curiosity that they wanted me to ask you. What are some of the typical complaints that you hear the contractors make if they wish they could change something? What would that be? What would, as they reflect on an engagement?
How much time have we got left, Tim?
Okay. Nutshell.
That's not fair. I mean, we've all got all kinds of complaints. I think that a lot of the time, what I hear is that the company they're not organized. They don't have their beep together at the moment. So they brought me in. I've got the skills, I've got the experience. I know how to do this, but they aren't ready. They're not ready to go yet. And contractors come in and start, good contractors start delivering value immediately. They come in, they get the lay of the land, they understand who the players are, they understand your internal processes or whatever it is, and then they want to start going. They want to start moving it forward. So then when they're kind of asked to remove obstacles that clearly could have been done earlier or by someone else, giving them a clear path to leading that organization to success, that's a pretty common complaint. So it's a bit like backing up to the very beginning yet again, go back to the beginning about really understanding what you need them to come in, deliver. What does success look like? Have we mapped that out? Have we level set the expectations with that contractor? That's probably the most common complaint.
Yeah, you're bringing them in at a future stage when you don't have the basics kind of done. I mean, this is our experience when we're dealing with large, complex projects, and we're bringing a lot of contractors together with a lot of the company side clients and resources. Is that we need to make sure that the contractor might be ready to sort of go, but if the work hasn't been staged appropriately, we may need to back up, and we may need to say, okay, well, this actually isn't sufficient for me to start, and we have some questions based on our experience that we need to answer. And I actually think this offers a huge advantage if you take that opportunity to then put the contractor at the table and say, okay, what do you need to know to be successful? You actually kind of can avoid some future pain by letting them help you land the way forward, so they know, in their bones what's going to happen throughout the course of their engagement, and they can help you understand what they've seen in the past and how to potentially avoid some risks. So
perfectly said, Tim. Perfect. That's exactly right. And they have that outside perspective that you talked about a little bit earlier, and they can help you see the forest for the trees. So getting them involved early and getting their insights and asking them, how can we help you ensure that you're going to make us successful? What do we need to do together to align our expectations and make sure we're going in the same direction? And what do you need from me? And here's what I need from you. Now we've got a plan. Let's go.
Mm-hmm. That lets them continue together, and now they're aligned, and now they can support each other, and now they can actually agree how often they're going to touch base again. So it's I think it's always advantageous generally to involve the contractors as soon as possible. And I mean, when we do our rapid norming work, it's a huge part of it. So I guess if you miss that step of the contract from the contractor perspective, if you feel uneasy, hey, it's a great time to sit down with your client and really let's paint a picture of what we're about to do together.
Yeah, I think that actually kind of goes back to Simeon's question much earlier, is, how can I differentiate myself from FTEs? And that's certainly one way to have those kind of frank conversations. When you're starting, initial conversations with a potential client, say, well, what's your strategy or roadmap look like? Let's look at it together. Here's what my experience tells me we should consider doing differently. Maybe there's things I can't see at the moment, that kind of thing. That's hugely different than the typical full-time employee interview process.
Mm-hmm. So we have one client that, one question that's coming here from Pushkar. He asks, can we talk a little bit about the impacts of offshoring and the big multinational corporations on the individual contractors, on the small-time providers or those smaller scale providers? What's your perspective on that? How are things affected as we move into this period of uncertainty by these large consulting houses or clearing houses?
I think that there's time will tell. There's a lot of unknown at the moment. So with the world's newly acquired skills in remote working and its acceptability, mm-hmm. What's to stop more knowledge economy, more knowledge workers from services being provided outside of the country we reside in? Yep. Mm-hmm. So why couldn't you offshore many more things? And I don't know that there's any good reason. If the language isn't a barrier, time zones are not a barrier for whatever reason, maybe it allows you around the clock delivery if that helps, push things through quicker. I expect that we'll see a continued trend to more offshoring when it comes to knowledge workers. That being said, there's still, at least, especially in the tech sector, there's a pretty insatiable demand for talent right now. There will always be a requirement for, resources locally. And so I don't know how much of an impact that will have, Pushkar. So it will be really interesting to see as we, progress through this and start to come out of this metamorphosis we're in, what shape will take. So it will be interesting to see. I think it's a great question. I don't know the answer.
I think it's an exciting time, and if you can get a better resource somewhere else that can do the job, I think there's no reason why you shouldn't go to that. I guess the question becomes: is the organization able to measure the value that they're getting out of their resources, and can they compare that to their alternatives? Obviously, when there's, again, we work a lot with leadership and coaching and things that are very, hands-on. So we do a lot of work locally. There's going to be an advantage to being able to be in the room. But when you're talking about remote, it's a really exciting time. I mean, I think we've got the opportunity now to start seeing people that were torn between leaving their home or perhaps where their community is and their sense of self is, in order to go and find work. And so I'm looking forward to the fact that we're going to see within Canada, for instance, talent that's in some of our more remote areas being made available to some of the big urban centers. And I think that that's something that's really, really efficient. But with that, there's going to be a need, as there has been for years, to compare, well, what's the price you're paying versus the quality that you're getting and the ease of adoption. But generally, it's going to create competition. And I think that's going to really make sure that everybody is on their game. I would add one thing, though, because Pushkar talks about the big multinational corporations, and of course, we see a trend towards supply chains wanting to have a single source. Maintaining, for me, I think there's an importance that we don't want to see concerns of simply supply chain and simplicity of hiring trump your access to quality and options. Because there's a lot of great people out there that have done a lot of great work, but they may not be sitting underneath your, one approved vendor. So there's a risk with that. You get an ease from the supply chain perspective, but you you accept the fact that you could be cutting out your options. So that's not really an answer, other than the fact of, I think it's going to happen. And I think the one thing that we can prepare to do is make sure that we can measure and articulate the value that we're getting out of these contractors and manage it appropriately, as we should be doing with our staff. But proper performance management, proper outcomes realization is got to just be ratcheted up. So
yeah, and the next question that Pushkar's question leads me to is then, should we, if we're talking about contractors in Canada or the US, should we be looking outside Canada or the US for our work as well? Interesting.
Yeah. Hey, that's the other side of that coin, is it gives us the opportunity to work with different industries and in different locales and different cultures, which is something that's always been some of the most rewarding work that I've done, being able to work in, Southeast Asia or work in Europe. And so it's just, we've just expanded that. I can see nothing but good stuff coming from this change, but again, I'm an optimist. So what am I going to say? Well, we're nearing the end of our time here, Kyle. So I guess in the last 4 minutes, is there anything that you would like to let people know so they can know where to find you and they can know where to ask you some additional questions? Would you like to reiterate some of that? Or anything that you're excited that's going on? Please share.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So probably the easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn, Kyle Woolgar. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions you might have. I'm quite frequently there answering questions. I have some content that could help you if you need, whether it's some checklists for risks of onboarding contractors, a glossary of contractor terminology to kind of help you dip your toe in those waters if you're not sure, and those types of things. So please feel free to reach out and I'd be happy to provide you with that. I'm really excited to see where things are going to land as we're emerging now, I guess, out of this transitionary time. It's such an unprecedented change that we're starting to embark on. I think it's really exciting. I think, anytime there's change, it creates lots of opportunity. It can also create a lot of fear and hesitancy anytime there's change. So it's an exciting time. And I think that, we've seen a bit of a bottom and we're only going up from here. That's my perspective. And I'm excited about it.
Well, that's great. For ourselves at Teamwork Excellence, for myself and Michael Fiss, who's in the background, always appreciated. We have a couple of things on the go that I'd like to let you know about. One is that we are always, but seem to be a greater push now on the other side of this equation, which is to help people with their career leadership. So we're offering support in that area. That is something that you can find, and I would just encourage you to reach out directly to us or at the info@teamworkexcellence email address, and you can check out what we've got on offer for individuals and groups. And then we're helping people with moving through this transitional time and the return to office, building great cultures. Keep an eye on our Brain Trust offerings. And if you haven't done so yet, make sure that you sign up to the newsletter. The easiest way to get to that is teamworkexcellence.com/newsletter. That'll keep you up to date on all of these that we put out. But with that being said, we're at time. And Kyle, I just want to say a great big thank you. I think you and I can continue the conversation. I know we've talked about continuing this on Clubhouse. If people want to join in there, it can be a little more open. People have already started to find us there, so I'm sure we can continue it. But in the meantime, thank you so much for taking the time to show up and to lend your knowledge to this issue. And it's just really appreciated.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks to you, Tim, and the rest of the Teamwork Excellence team for the opportunity. It's been a blast.
Okay, great. I can't wait till we can do something in the future. In the meantime, thank you very much, everybody, for showing up. That's it. That's our 60-minute leadership summit to help you increase your capacity. So join us again next time. Thanks so much, and have a great rest of your day. See you later.